week of Thanksgiving, we do a reality check, a price check. The price of a traditional Thanksgiving dinner has gone down for the third straight year. But as we know, when we go to the grocery store, our overall grocery bills have been going up over the past year. And that is one of the main factors why more Iowans have to turn to food pantries and food banks to feed their families. Hi, I'm Dave Price. Tariffs, the partial federal government shutdown, overall inflation, thousands of people losing their jobs in the state. You add up all of that, and you see why food banks and food pantries have been so stressed. Plus, President Donald Trump had chosen to delay federal food assistance benefits for millions of people after congressional Democrats had refused to agree to the Republicans' temporary spending bill. Okay, so what's going through your head when you see that they have an agreement to fully reopen the government, then you just have to wait for the SNAP benefits to get distributed, get dispersed to people's cards. But then very soon after, you hear from the Trump administration that eventually people are going to have to reapply for benefits. So what's going through your head then?
You know, there's obviously some initial concern anytime the USDA secretary makes a statement about the program. Um, but I think I would also, urge a little pause to wait and see what that we've seen some bluster, I guess is what I will say. And things that, actually are more status quo being tried to be pitched as some innovative new approach. So everyone has to reapply for SNAP benefits. Most people in Iowa, that's every 6 months. For certain folks, seniors, people with a disability, it's every year. But everyone is already recertifying for SNAP benefits. Um, Honestly, it would be a huge lift for state agencies to have to force everyone to recertify. And again, if they're going to be recertifying in 6 months anyway, there's not a huge incentive to see that done. So I think this may be one of those examples where we're hearing some rhetoric from the administration, but there's not actually a policy change that at least we have seen yet. Um, but what I will say is, we see a lot of folks fall off at recertification, people who should still qualify for benefits. So, and this will be something with some of the changes from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, HR 1, that folks are going to have to recertify and will have new guidelines because of the changes. So when they're doing their recertification process, they maybe are now going to be subject to work requirements. Or we have refugee families losing access to SNAP because refugees and asylees were banned from SNAP under HR 1, and they're finding out at recertification. So this may be more talk than actual, substantive policy change. We'll have to wait and see.
This new aspect, but going back to the big beautiful, it will take some people off, and you just mentioned some of those. So what will the implications of that be?
Yeah, and we had a number of changes to SNAP eligibility that went into effect November 1st. Again, during the shutdown, the refugee and asylee piece, USDA didn't issue guidance till October 31st, literally one day before states were supposed to implement these changes. So we saw the shutdown also slow things down at the USDA Food and Nutrition Service, which has made it more difficult for states to implement some of these changes. But yeah, banning refugees and asylees and other humanitarian immigrants from SNAP, that's going to be a big change for those families and for organizations who support them. Not a huge percentage of the overall SNAP population, around 1.5% of everyone on SNAP in the state of Iowa. But those tend to be larger families. And so they could be seeing a significant reduction in benefit amounts. And those families, food pantries may not have the type of foods they're specifically looking for. Obviously, we always try to have, culturally appropriate foods, but those families just SNAP serves them a lot easier to be able to use those at a local grocery store than needing to find and piece together things from different food pantries. That's a big change. Another big change is work requirements. So starting November 1st, SNAP already had work requirements, but it's basically expanding the populations of people who the work requirements apply to. So already had work requirements for folks 18 to 54 without dependents, and this increases it to 55 to 64-year-olds will have to comply with that work requirement. Parents and caretakers of children 13 and up. So if they have a kid who's under 13, they're exempt. If they're a teenager, they're not exempt. And then it also removed exemptions for veterans, unhoused people, and young adults aging out of foster care, which we know are some really marginalized groups who have, very specific barriers that may prevent them from getting employment. So those are some changes that we're worried about.
There was one statistic that stood out to me as we were putting together this week's show, and that's this. Feeding America, the national nonprofit, estimates that about 1 in 8 Iowans is considered food insecure. Back in 2015, Feeding America found that about 1 in 8 Iowans was considered food insecure. So that means over the course of a decade, this state has made no measurable improvement in helping people feed themselves. Something to think about as we look ahead to the next Iowa legislative session and the 2026 midterms about which people you want to be in charge. That is Inside Iowa Politics for this week.